Well, it's good to be back. It's week 6, and this is a lecture associated with week 6 of this class. In addition, be sure that this presentation only supplements and is in addition to the reading requirements in the book and the other assignments, and does not replace those. And today we're going to be talking about wages associated with wage and hour and certain benefits that are provided by companies to employees. And so as we start off and talking about compensation and benefits, it's important to note, and we're going to take this a little bit from a different perspective, but there are a lot of common practices to provide benefits to employees and certain payment of wages in states. Again, it's going to be covered by state to state, but in Texas, since we're in Texas, a lot of these are just what companies do, but they're not really required by Texas law to do them. Unless there's a written policy or agreement or some kind of in Texas, then you're not required to provide vacation at all, or any kind of sick leave or paid holidays. Most companies provide all that, but they do that as a benefit to employees to try to make the employment relationship good and to be competitive in the marketplace, because other employers provide that, they're going to provide it here. But they do that not because it's required by statute or any kind of other requirement. They're doing it because to help be competitive into the marketplace, and we'll talk about that as we go through this chapter or this lecture. In Texas, and this will apply in other states, and that state law will control. There is, as I just stated, no legal requirement beyond minimum wage or overtime, and that's required by the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, which we'll talk about, to provide any additional wages. The state law requirements are consistent, or there are none, but which means that the federal requirements are in place. The state law requirements that are present basically say that you have to pay employees, at least non-salary employees, at least 2 times a month at a minimum, and salaried employees at least 1 time a month. Employers pay market rates to attract candidates, so they're paying above minimum wage and things like that, because if they don't, no one will come work for their job, and they'll go work for their competitors or other people. Holidays pay, that's not required in Texas, but Texas, typically most companies will pay holiday pay. Then they typically will pay and give people paid days off for national holidays, and sometimes they will pay people time and a half if they work during the holiday. But that is not required, and there's no statutory requirement to do so, but they do so to try to keep up employee morale and make sure that their customers are treated properly when dealing with employees on those days. Vacation and sick pay, another thing that's not required under Texas law, but that most give it. When they do provide it, you accrue it. Typically, you'll accrue the vacation, or PTO is another way companies are calling it and refer to that, and that's paid time off. But when you leave, if you have any accrued benefits, you're not entitled to those when you leave. So a company, if you had 2 weeks of vacation and they terminate you, they're not required to pay that out in Texas. Now, it's governed by any policy or agreement they have. So if they have a policy that says if you give 2 weeks notice and then you provide the 2 weeks notice, they may say we'll pay out your vacation. But if you don't provide the 2 weeks notice, then you're not going to get paid out accrued but unused vacation. And so that's something they're putting into it as an agreement. Other states require vacation and paid time off and sick pay to be paid no matter why the relationship ends, and one of those would be California. So that's governed by law of the state, and is another example of the fragmented process, or the fragmented laws that affect the employee and employer relationship across the various states. In addition to the pay and some vacation or paid time off benefits, most companies provide other benefits, such as medical insurance and things like that. And under the Affordable Care Act, you're not required to provide it, but if you don't provide it, you will not be entitled to certain benefits, and there are certain penalties. So most companies do provide some kind of medical benefits. And those are very important to employees, and you're going to have trouble hiring workforce if you don't provide those, because that's one of the key concerns to a lot of people when they're trying to get to make decisions on who they're going to work for, is what are the medical benefits and dental benefits associated with that. Those type of benefits, and it would also include long-term disability plans, short-term disability plans, and insurance, like life insurance. Those plans are typically what are referred to as ERISA plans. And ERISA is a type of federal law, Employment, Retirement, Income, and Security Act, that is going to cover those benefit plans. That law is very specific, and it basically says that the plan document, the medical plan document controls, or the dental plan document controls, or the life insurance plan document controls. Whatever's in those plan documents is going to be what benefits the employee is entitled to. And if it's not in those plan documents, even if the HR person or someone else tells you incorrectly, you will not be able to sue based on what you were told, because the plan document controls over other verbal statements associated with what the benefits are provided. And a lot of it determines, the plan document will determine eligibility and who's eligible for the plan and who can participate in it. The plan document will also appoint a plan administrator, and that plan administrator is given the authority to interpret the plan and determine when benefits will or when will not be paid. And as long as they don't abuse their discretion in that regard, the courts will leave it to their interpretation of the plan. And there's very limited rights to sue the plan, and because the plan, if you want to make a claim, you have to go through the claims process. And that is specified in the plan document and has to be done so. And then you have to make the plan documents available for the employees to see. And the reason why they do this is, if you think about it, the benefit plan is for all employees. And so if you think of a medical plan, everyone's paying in premiums. And those premiums, when taken in, have to be able to provide the benefits for the entire workforce. So if someone comes in and wants to try some experimental treatment that's not been proven, that's very, very, very expensive, the plan administrator may say, we're not going to pay for that experimental treatment because it's too expensive, the outcome is unknown, and we want to save all this money for other claims that may come in. And so they can deny certain plans or certain claims for benefits if they're not, more traditional and more in line with what the plan has provided historically. Also, COBRA is the consolidated COBRA is in there. COBRA provides for insurance that will, when you leave, you have the right to continue your insurance on a go-forward basis, but you have to pay for the entire benefit. And so lots of companies will subsidize the employee and their dependents' insurance, and then the employee may only have to pay a couple $100 or $100 a month or $50 a month to get covered. But when they leave, they have to pay the full rate of the plan, which can oftentimes be over $1,000, or for a family, maybe $1,500. And you will have to pay that each month. And COBRA would allow you to extend your benefits up to 18 months after you leave if you individually pay for the full premium for those benefits. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that's the that is the federal law that deals with the payment of wages. And what it requires, and it covers all employees in the United States, is that employees be paid a minimum of $7.25 an hour for minimum wage for each hour worked. Each state can pass a law that would raise that minimum wage. Texas doesn't have a law, so it falls in line with $7.25. But certain states have raised their minimum wage to $14 an hour or even more. And if a state does that, then an employer employing people in that state has to comply with the state law and pay that higher minimum wage rate. Employees are also entitled to overtime unless they are exempt from the statute. And what that means is the statute covers everyone, but you can be exempt from it, and that's why you hear people talking about exempt and non-exempt employees. Non-exempt employees are entitled to minimum wage and overtime. Exempt employees are entitled to a guaranteed salary, as well as they're not entitled to overtime, and because they're exempt from the statute. What the statute provides is that any person who works more than 40 hours in a week is entitled to 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. And the regular rate of pay is highlighted in this slide because a lot of people think it's the hourly rate. And people refer to it as 1.5 times their hourly rate of pay. But that is not accurate. It says regular rate of pay. And so if you're given other benefits or other bonuses or things like that, that can affect the regular rate of pay. And if that happens, then if you only pay on what you would consider the hourly rate of pay, you'll be underpaying your overtime because it's a 1.5 times the regular rate of pay, not 1.5 times the hourly rate of pay. Certain states like California require overtime if you work more than 8 hours in a day. But in Texas, it's 40 hours in a work week. And what's important here is, what is a work week? People will think a work week is Monday to Friday. But that's not what a work week is. A work week is any 7-day period, which is as designated by the employer, and they can designate it from, Sunday at 12:01 or 12 o'clock to, Saturday night at 11:59, or any other 7-day period. So it's 168 hours, which is 7 days. And if you work over 40 hours in the designated work week of the employer, then you're entitled to 1.5 times for every hour worked over 40 in that work week. And if you violate that, you will have to pay what should have been paid, as well as any what's called liquidated damages, which is 2 times the amount of what should have been paid, as well as attorney's fees. And if you're violating it, those amounts of damages can add up very quickly. And so what we talked about in the previous slide, I kind of explained exempt versus non-exempt. Exempt is someone who does not have to comply with the certain minimum wage and the overtime requirements of the FLSA that we were just talking about. Non-exempt, they get the benefits of those statutes and provisions. To be exempt, it's a 2-part test. It's a salary test as well as a duties test. And both need to be met except for outside sales, which is one of the exemptions. But for the other exemptions, you have to meet both the salaries test as well as the duties test. A lot of people, if you ask them, Why is this person exempt? They will say because they're paid a salary. That is not a proper assessment of it, because that's half of the question. They have to be paid a salary, but they also have to be paid to do certain duties. Now, what is a salary that qualifies to satisfy this test? You have to be paid at least a guaranteed salary of $684 a week, which is not very high, really, if you think about it, because that only averages out to a little over $35,000 per year. But a guaranteed salary, what that means is if they work 1 hour in that work week, then, and it's not the first week of employment and not their last week of employment, then you have to pay them for the remainder of the week. So for instance, in Houston, sometimes we'll get hurricanes that will come through here, and you'll have to close down for a couple of days. You can't deduct from that guaranteed amount because y'all were not able to open the office for 3 days that week. It's a guaranteed. If they work during that work week, they're entitled to the full amount, and that's what it means. If you're doing deductions from that because they mess up and do bad work or don't show up a particular day or something like that, then you can mess up your guaranteed salary requirement and mess up your exempt status from FLSA. In addition to the salary, you also have to do certain duties, and there's certain duties associated with each exemption. And the main exemptions, what they call the white collar exemption, are executive versus managerial, or not versus, executive / managerial. You also have the professional exemption, the administrative exemption. There's a computer worker exemption that it doesn't exempt you from certain overtime requirements, and then outside sales. Outside sales is what it means. It's working outside the company. You have to spend primarily most of your time traveling around a customer's office doing sales or promoting products. You can't be sitting at your desk doing sales or making phone calls to do sales. That would not constitute outside sales, and people doing that duty would not be exempt. And so you have to be doing some of these duties and satisfy the duties test plus the salary to be exempt. The highly compensated narrows the duties test requirement, because under each of these exemptions, executive, managerial, professional, there are additional tests as is shown in the textbook, but you usually have to hit the salary plus 3 or more of those duties underneath the test. But if you hit the highly compensated amount of salary, which is currently $107,000 or so in a year, if you're going to make that in a year, then your duties test becomes easier, and you only have to meet less of the sub-elements under each of these exemptions as shown in the book. And if you do not satisfy the salary and duties test, then the employee is entitled to overtime for each hour worked over 40 hours in the state of Texas, as well as other states, but that because of certain state laws like California, they will require overtime after 8 hours in a day, and then double time after 12 hours in a particular day. And so certain states really do up and provide a lot more benefits than the Fair Labor Standards Act does as a federal law that applies to all employees in the nation. Wage and hour is a hotbed of litigation and has been for the last 10 years or so. And the plaintiffs' lawyers really like it because almost every company has people misclassified. And the statute also provides attorney's fees when they do it. And because there's mandatory attorney's fees and most companies have people misclassified, the first question when someone shows up at someone's office, an attorney's office, when they've been let go is, why are you here? And then the next question is, how are you paid, and they pay you correctly, because they really love these type of FLSA claims. The burden of proof is on the employer, because you have to prove the exemption. You have to prove their exempt status and why they should not be covered by the FLSA, versus the employee having to proving why they are covered. So the burden of proof is on the employer to prove the exemption. The requirements under the FLSA, if someone is truly an employee, you cannot waive them. So you cannot get your employee to say, I want to work more this week because I want to finish a project, but you don't have to pay me overtime. If you agreed to that, you could agree to it, but later on if the employee says, you didn't pay me overtime, you could not hold them to that agreement, even if it was in writing, because they cannot waive their rights to overtime or non-compliance with the FLSA. And because of that, a lot of people don't know that. They're working in a company and the company says, you can only work here if you agree not to get overtime. And people need a job so badly, they'll say sure, and they will agree to do it. And then later on, they come back and say, when they go to that lawyer, did you get overtime? And they'll say no. And they say, but I agreed not to get it. The lawyer will know that that's not enforceable, and you will get a lawsuit. Why the plaintiff's lawyers really like these is because they file what's called a collective action. And what is that? That's a representative action that one person files. And usually when you have one person misclassified and we're not paying them proper overtime, there are other people that will also be in the same situation as that employee, because usually companies treat certain groups of employees the same with respect to that classification of employee. And so you may have heard of class actions, and class actions are different than collective actions. Collective actions are what people use in the FLSA context, and versus class actions are more in the just consumer context. And if you'll see those, and if someone files a class action, the idea is it covers all of the consumers who were hurt by that product, even if you don't join into the lawsuit. And then you have to opt out of a class action, whereas a collective action is considered an opt-in. So one person sues for a wage and hour violation, and then they go to the court and say, I want to represent all people similarly situated with me. And the plaintiff's lawyers will request to send a notice out to all current and former employees within the last 3 years who are subject to this policy, and see if they want to join into the lawsuit. And when they join in, then this one individual will be able to represent all their interests. And the plaintiffs' attorneys love this, because now they're representing one person effectively, or one person in reality, but they're effectively representing all the other people who opted into the collective action. And that's why I say at the top of this, the FLSA is the plaintiff's lawyer best friend, because there is a lot of potential recovery of damages under the statute if companies misclassify their workers. So it is something that companies need to pay attention to with respect to wage and hour violations, and make sure they're paying and have people properly classified as exempt or non-exempt by paying them a salary and ensuring they're satisfying one of the duties tests if they're not paying them overtime. And that ends the lecture for week 6. Thank you for your attention.